Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on the podcast for the first time, Jake Remmert. If you aren't familiar with him, he has a bachelor's of science in exercise science and is a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He is currently a PhD candidate and graduate research assistant at Florida Atlantic University's muscle physiology laboratory. Man, I don't know
A
what
mouthful.
is going on with all that, but I could not pronounce any of those words that
A
entire
lot of
time.
big words. Half of the PhD is just learning how to pronounce all the words, man.
Oh man, that's it. What a way to start the episode, huh? But either way, and also Jake also does work with data-driven strength, and we've had man who Josh and Zach on, and then I'm drawing a blank. Is it Max or who's
Drake.
okay, Drake? Okay,
Drake.
and then so maybe I guess I thought maybe Max was involved too, but yeah, Jake is also part of data-driven strength. So looking forward to chatting with him. And yeah, Jake, thanks for coming on, man. Again, sorry for butchering literally half of your bio there on that, but yeah, thanks for coming on.
All good. Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and ton of stuff from a hypertrophy oriented background and strength, obviously with data driven strength, right up our alley here of topics that we typically talk about. Real quick, I gave a brief kind of background of you, but I always like to any new guests I have, just that brief kind of background of how you got to where you're at today. And yeah, man, we'll go from there.
Cool. It's actually good timing because we're getting relatively close to my 10-year anniversary of thought out, intelligent training. That'll be this fall, which is also part of why I'm doing about a month, actually almost 2 months ago now, I started a contest prep for bodybuilding.
Oh, nice.
So I wanted to do it anyway, but it's also like a cool celebration for the
Yeah.
10-year thing, right? Yeah, it's crazy that it's been that long, man. But I got started just like everybody else, watching YouTube and Instagram and I read a bunch of articles. That was still a big thing at the time. And just, stumbled really early on, luckily, across this guy named Lane Norton. And he obviously very famous, right? But he really like gave me a path early on, unbeknownst to him, just that there is a way. It's not just that, oh, this worked for me, that worked for me, whatever. You're just trying shotgun approach. There's research on this stuff and people. So I learned that there's that. I learned that you can do strength and hypertrophy at the same time. I learned all the nutrition stuff, obviously, that he's more well known for. All of the just you can do academia in this. You can have a job as a coach. I learned everything. And then just spread out from him, I found 3DMJ and Renaissance periodization and all these different Revive Stronger, all these different people. And so it was just a flood immediately of like evidence-based stuff. So I'm so grateful for that because I didn't have to unlearn a bunch of not so good habits and ways of thinking. That was good, a good way to start. And I just jumped in and I didn't know what I was doing. I was very self-conscious. I was very embarrassed, frankly, to be lifting weights. You just roll with it, right? You just keep showing up and eventually you slowly get less embarrassed and just becomes part of what you do, right? So that's how we started and eventually found powerlifting after it was like maybe a year or so in to training and found powerlifting and I was like, man, this is it. This is all I want to do. Competed a handful of times. And then eventually I ended up having a lower back injury that wasn't horrible, but it took me out of powerlifting for 6, 7 months. And I was like, let me just try hypertrophy stuff. And I haven't really looked back. That was 2019. That's what I've been doing lately, just basically bodybuilding and tried to do a contest prep in 2020, but in early 2020, everything shut down for a little something that happened in the world. We're coming back for round two this year, trying to really make sure that everything is wrapped up with a nice little bow with the prep this time. So yeah, man, I guess there's the cliff notes. So I've had my feet in powerlifting. Now I'm bodybuilding. I will go back to powerlifting at some point. I always say that. We'll see. Whenever this well feels like it's dried up a little bit, I'll go back over and bounce back and forth. But yeah, man, just having fun with this right now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. It gives a good idea of where you've been. So started with the powerlifting, switched over. Have you ever, right now you're in the middle of prepping, have you ever, because I know Eric Helms he was doing both for a little while and back. Have you ever thought about doing that? Or is that just something like for you, it's just like, hey, I don't have the bandwidth to be able to do both at the same time?
Yeah, I did do both for a while. Right now, it's bandwidth. I don't know if it's a bandwidth thing so much as a time constraint thing. That powerlifting just takes a long time, dude. I just and I my attention span is such that I have like an hour to lift, maybe an hour, 20 minutes. And I just want to get in there and get to work. I don't want to take a half an hour to warm up and do all because I have really bad mobility. So like squatting was always a chore. As much as I loved it, it just takes a while to warm up for me. So Right now, from a time constraint perspective, I like just having the bodybuilding stuff, but someday for sure, what I foresee is at some point shifting more towards doing both again, and then see maybe there's a meet I want to do. Let me specialize in that for a while and let it be a shifting goalpost. But we'll see.
Yeah, just get your you got your feet wet back in 2020 with us. Get your feet wet, get a contest prep in, see what you need to do there with that, and then maybe reevaluate and try to do both. For you, what's been like, what pros and cons of each? What is it? Do you one more than the other? What do you, yeah, where do you find yourself at there with that?
So tough. It's so tough because I think I get something very different from each. Powerlifting, I always got, there's like this energy in powerlifting of you have to like go out and get it, right? Like the weight is so heavy and even RPE and whatever, but it's still heavy weight. Even RPE 6 or 7 is still heavy. And you have to be like very assertive and very confident. And you have to go do it. And bodybuilding is, it has that to a degree, but I think much more so it has that it's a different kind of strength. It's like endurance and like how much of this can you just put yourself through? And I love both of those things. I think both of those things separately have made me grow as a person just outside of the gym. So that's one of the main things I think, like philosophically between the two. Obviously, with bodybuilding, I really enjoy, like I said, not having this huge, extensive warm up, being able to just get in, get to work. I don't have to take super long rest periods. I miss feeling strong, right? There, that's definitely a thing at the top of my mind often. I go in there, I'll squat in the Smith machine with 185 pounds, and I'm like, all right, this is a little different from what we used to do. But then it feels better. The muscles feel better, my joints feel better. So it's tough. There's so many pros and cons to each. Right now, the pros of bodybuilding outweigh the cons. Obviously, the diet isn't the funnest thing either. I am not so blessed with the fast metabolism either. I haven't talked about this much because I don't want it to sound like I'm complaining, but I'm like 19 weeks out or something like that from the roughly somewhere in there. And I'm already under 2,000 calories a day,
Wow.
right? Like I'm 5'11. So it's just one of those things. It is what it is. It doesn't feel that bad. Like I'm fine. But nonetheless, I would love to have pizza more often. So it's tough, but what I like to try to come back to is just they're both awesome for their own reasons. And I think it's cool to be able to shift back and forth. Whatever, it's been 5 years now since I was in the powerlifting modes. I will go back though. But yeah, it's pros and
Yep.
cons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like like you said, some people just really love lifting heavy, and it is slightly different, like you said, in terms of how your mindset, even though it's still lifting, it's like it is slightly different. And so you have to, I could see where it would be nice to go back and forth to one or the other. And again, maybe some people maybe find themselves on one end of the spectrum where they enjoy one or the other. I'm curious from a just your prep right now. So you said you're 19 weeks out, already under 2,000 calories most of the time. Was this something that you just found out now, or is this, you've ran fat loss phases in the past and you knew that this was the case, or are you really now
Man,
just finding this out?
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. It's funny actually. The last, man, probably year, my mission has been to get more activity into my daily life, which sounds so silly, but I'm a PhD student, like we said. So a lot of what I'm doing is on the computer. And even when I'm in the lab doing data collection, a lot of it, the research that we do now, we used to do studies where it was a lot of squat and bench press and all that, and you're loading plates all day and you're spotting people and doing the whole thing. Now, like we're spoiled now. We use a tonal for a lot of stuff, so we don't have to load plates anymore. So even data collection days are way less strenuous than they used to be. So I'm just very sedentary. And before this last year or so, like it was my average step count would probably be around like 2 or 3,000 at the
Oh,
most.
wow.
Yeah, very low. So I've been like, okay, let me try to slowly walk that up so I don't have to diet on 1,500 calories at the start of the prep. But so I knew it was going to be like this, but I tried to offset it a little bit. Luckily, now my habitual step count's somewhere in the like 1,000-ish. If I'm just not trying, that's just my normal, which is good. That certainly has helped. But yeah, it is what it is, man.
Yep. You just kind of, yeah, it ultimately comes down to your choice, right? It's like, hey, I want to do this. And then at that point, you unfortunately just have to accept how low it's going to go. That's just where it's going to be. And you had that choice to stick with it or move on. But we're crazy and we like to do crazy stuff like this. Why not?
It's part of the fun, right? I think that, which sounds weird to say that, but so I don't know if you're familiar. My coach is Ryan Doris. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I know the name. Yeah.
Awesome. So something that he's talked about a lot and that really resonated with me, and we talked about it a lot, is this idea of like desirable difficulty of like our lives. Obviously, everybody deals with stuff. I'm not saying everyone's lives are easy, right? But maybe I should just speak for myself. But relative to people who lived 1,000 years ago and they're just struggling to survive, whatever, life's pretty easy. And I think about even now, people who have a much more difficult life. A lot of those people, not a lot of those, I shouldn't say a lot, but at least some, that pressure can make diamonds, right? Sometimes it can really push you to grow and rise to the occasion and all that. And I'm fortunate I haven't had to grow up in those circumstances, but at the same time, I really would like to progress and level up, right? So there was this idea that came out of that of, man, what if we just self-impose a little bit of difficulty, but keep it at that desirable level so it's not overwhelming and just soul crushing, but at least is enough to make you rise to the occasion. I think that part of the diet can be that, right? Would I prefer to be losing weight on 3,000 calories? Sure. But at the same time, I think this is building some skills and some insights that I might not get otherwise. So I just try to lean into as positive of a spin as I can. But I do think that is a thing, right? And just the training in general, training's hard, right? Even outside of a prep of any kind. Any of those little life lessons, any of those little nuggets that we can find, I think are always really helpful.
Yeah, man. No, I couldn't agree more. I like that you brought that up because, like you said, it is, again, compared to people thousands of years ago, we have it relatively easy, right? There's always going to be unique challenges and things that are challenging. But from that sense, like we really don't have to suffer like we did back then. And so it's seeking that stuff out, as crazy as it may seem. Like you said, a lot of good things can come out of it. And for me, like I did 2 bodybuilding shows back in, man, this was probably 2017 or 2018 now. And man, those were very like, instrumental times in my life. And it really taught me a lot of things outside of just, getting on stage. Like there's a lot of life lessons from it that I still carry to this day. And it can really be a good experience like that. Again, people might think we're crazy. I'm sure if we thousands of years ago, somebody found out that you're purposely trying to starve yourself, essentially, they'd be like, what the hell is going on here with this? Hey, it's different times, right? But yeah, no, man, that's awesome. I like that. And I've heard of Ryan Doris, and I know he's been like a really big natural bodybuilder, I believe, for a while. And so really popular guy in the industry there with that.
Yeah, he's the man. I can't, he's posting a little bit more often now recently again. There was a long period where he wasn't really super active on social media. But if you look back through his old YouTube videos, it's an absolute gold mine. He was like one of the OG fitness YouTuber wave, right? Like he was part of that. And it's just absolute gold, man. If you don't mind me asking, I would love to hear about like some of the stuff you got out of your preps, like some of those life lessons, I don't know. It feels almost like transformative in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, man, for one, just like the big thing for me was just it taught me how to get uncomfortable. Cause for me, like I see myself now, I have a podcast, things like that, and people might know me from that standpoint. But man, the thought of me like just getting up on stage and like doing things like putting myself uncomfortable like that just was like way out of the realm of possibility. But the thought of before I actually of doing that, I'm like, man, I just don't see how this is going to happen. But that taught me like, hey, you got to get uncomfortable. Again, you might not feel great doing it, but it's going to teach you that. It really taught me to get uncomfortable, not only like getting on stage and a Speedo essentially, right? That itself, but like just getting uncomfortable in terms of leading up to it, right? Like the diet side of things, like that's uncomfortable too, like you said. And so it taught me to lean into that versus, oh, hey, I'm hungry, I need to go eat. So I think that was like the first time I really pushed through that. And again, I think it's, in today's world, a pretty good skill to learn to diet. Again, I think you can take it, some people can take it too far, but again, too many people, I think this comes back to the being overly comfortable and things like that. I think too many people, like anytime they're a little bit hungry, it's, oh dude, I got to eat. And we don't ever get that any sense of like hunger. And I think it's a good skill to be able to learn, but just the staying consistent part of it too, right? Like that's the thing with the prep, man. You have to, I'm sure you already know this and you knew this going into it. It's like just day in and day out. Like you just have to put in the work, even when you don't necessarily want to, because if you only do it when you want to, it's like, it's going to really slow it down and you're probably not going to be able to get on stage. So those are probably the really big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, is that kind of what you felt like or what you?
100%. Yeah, very much. We were talking before we started about how it's raining a ton here in South Florida, and it's going to do this. I think they said we're supposed to get 12 inches of rain before the weekend, and it's, what is it, Wednesday afternoon, and it's just, that's such a barrier. I don't want to go out and drive. Like the roads are flooded. I don't want to do that. But you got to do it. And I love that you emphasize that. Like, that's just such a life skill. There's going to be stuff we don't want to do, whether it's work stuff or whatever, obligations with different relationships you have, etc. So it's good training, I think, with kind of low stakes. Because ultimately, if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, man. I like that a lot.
Off that, I think a lot of people think of bodybuilding is very somebody's really into themselves, arrogant type situation, and oh, you just care about how you look. But people don't that haven't really gone through it, they don't really see that side of things. And that was something that I really wanted to try to get out there and be like, hey, yeah, I know it's weird getting up on stage, whatever, for the normal person and whatnot. But again, there's a ton that you can take from it. And again, I think a lot of people overlook. They just look at the, oh, hey, you're just getting super shredded and whatnot. But there's a lot of, if you do it the right way and you look into these things, like there's a lot of things you can take from it that you can apply elsewhere that I thought was super helpful. So yeah. For you, man, what anything special that you're like working on during this period of time in terms of diet or training or anything like that? Anything that he's got anything like that? Are you tracking or stuff like that?
Yeah, we're tracking everything, partially for the prep and partially for I'm doing a case study for the whole prep that I'm very excited about. How many case studies are there right now? I think a dozen maybe, which isn't much. Like
Yeah.
that's not even just to put it in perspective for people who aren't familiar with like research. That 12 it's 12 or 15 total participants, I think is what it is, right? I probably a little bit off, but somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's not even enough for one group in a powered study. Like it's nothing. So we need more case studies. So I wanted to do that anyway, but I was looking into all of these and I was like, man, we have the ability to do some really cool stuff in our lab. And I want to do this before I graduate. I wanted to prep this year anyway, so if the stars aligned. So I'm tracking a ungodly amount of things, which it's either going to drive me crazy or keep me distracted enough to the point where prep's not as bad. So I'm hoping it's the latter. But yeah, it's beyond the training and cardio and macros. It's all that. It's sleep. I have like 5 or 6 different psychology questionnaires. I have step counts. Then we're doing blood draws. And we're doing performance testing. And we're doing RMR testing. And we're doing energy expenditure in a treadmill walk. Like all kinds of stuff. So yes, we're tracking everything, but it will be for a good cause. I genuinely think it will be the coolest and most comprehensive case study that we have yet, as long as I actually nail it, right? So no pressure.
Right.
But yeah, it'll be cool.
Man, not only do you have the pressure of trying to get lean for stage, but also now getting this case study done. But hey, I feel like, man, the more accountability, like you said, it can definitely be super helpful there with that. Cool. So are you guys like going to try to implement anything like in terms of maybe like refeeds, diet breaks, stuff like that throughout to maybe like talk about that or yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We have actually 2 refeeds in now already, which has been not, we were doing one refeed for the last few weeks, and we're going to try out 2 and see how that feels. The same average calories, macros, and everything, just shuffling them around a little bit. So far, I like them all. I like refeeds a lot personally for me. It's hit and miss with different people, right? Some people love it. Some people find it's a good adherence tool, and other people it's just a trigger to go binge and it throws them off. So luckily, it doesn't trigger me like that. I'm happy about that. But only downside for me so far is that just means the non-refeed days get pretty low. What are you gonna do? So we got some refeeds in there. I'm sure we'll diet break at some point, but I'm not sure when. We got another 4.5 months or something like that. So plenty of time to work something in there. That's on the nutrition front. From the training front, I think we've talked about I'm deloading this week, and then we're going to start next week with the next step forward, basically. I'm sure you're aware, but for any of the listeners who are not, there's been a lot of discussion lately about potential dose response between closer to failure you are with hypertrophy. And then we've had a lot of these high volume studies that have come out that seems like not every time, but relatively often we're seeing these high volumes pretty much always grow more, right? No, I shouldn't say pretty much always, often grow more. So it's like just more, right? Tend to grow more. And, dieting, I'm not building a ton of muscle right now, but the more stimulus I get is good to retain all of it. So between those things, there's the research continues to mount on like the lengthened partials and all that good stuff. So I think that's the next step is continuing to just build up the training dose. It's been pretty just normal meat and potatoes hypertrophy stuff, 1 to 2 RIR for the most part. Volume is moderate for me, and nothing fancy, no drop sets, no any of that stuff. So I think that's the next step as we just start to layer in some of the fun bells and whistles that I'm looking forward to. My last check-in that I sent him, I was just like, dude, I'm so excited. I just want to do everything. I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm gonna have to dedicate a little bit more time to training, but I'm looking forward to that. It's funny, I look up and I haven't prioritized my own training and nutrition and all that this much honestly, since early 2020 when that contest prep ended. Since then, there's just a lot of stuff to spare the long story. There's a lot of stuff going on. And it just has never been the top priority, but now it's one or two pretty much every day, and it feels good, man. So I'm excited for that. And then the last piece is just a lot of posing practice, a lot of posing practice. That's just one of those things that we can't control a whole lot with bodybuilding. Genetics is such a wild card. Who else shows up to the show, how lean they are, what the judging is like, all of it. And the one thing that we really can control, or one of the few things, is how well you present yourself, right? And you're posing. And are you smooth or are you shaky? Do you know how to angle your body or not? All those things. And we got like some good practice that we still got to get in here. So ramping that up is that last piece, I think, to bring us all together, all the pieces, and we'll run with that for a little bit and see where we go.
Yeah, man, the posing, that's one thing that people forget about too, that you really do need to dedicate some time to that. And like you said, it can make or break. Even if you look great normally, it really can make a difference. So you definitely want to nail that and everything. And for me, it was helpful to really help me maybe connect to some muscles that I had a little bit harder of a time at some point too. So it can be positive from that standpoint. As far as like your rate of loss, what are you looking at there for that? Are you going a little bit slower? And then, yeah.
Yeah, we're average has probably been around a pound a week so far, which is good. It's a good rate for us to be ready when I'm aiming to be ready. It's one of those things that I wanted to start the prep a bit earlier than we did. But I mentioned the case study, right? Trying to get that up and running was more work than I anticipated. So that delayed things a little bit. At the start, we tried to hit the ground running that first month or so. And then now things have come back to a little bit more reasonable of a pace. I also have been traveling a ton, so that was throwing a wrench in there as well. But now we're at a good place where around a pound a week we can ride that out for quite a while and be fine, and then probably slow that rate down as we get closer and closer. But yeah, I don't have a ton of time to spare. Hopefully we can fit a diet break in there at some point. If not, I think we'll be all right. But another 4.5 months of this without any sort of break is not ideal. We got to do what we got to do.
Yep. Got to do what you got to do. Yep. Off that, you mentioned, and I think this will be really helpful for the audience. You mentioned that during this year also we're doing some traveling and things like that. Was there anything that was super helpful there for you to stay on track during that period of time?
Yeah, actually, you know what? I went into it really dreading it because I was like, this is going to make it so much harder. And in a way, it almost made it easier in hindsight because we were out doing stuff all day. And basically, what I did is step number one, right? Get to the Airbnb, drop my stuff off, go to a grocery store and buy. So just so I'm not going out to eat so many times. That's been a game changer, which sounds so obvious, but I didn't think about it for the longest time. But so that was super helpful. So it's just a bunch of Greek yogurt and chicken and vegetables, whatever. So then my strategy was basically in the morning, I usually wait 2 to 3 hours before I eat breakfast anyway, just because I'm not hungry right away. But I would try to postpone that just a little bit more if I could, just so I had less time in the day to deal with food. And then have a as filling of a breakfast as I could that was still macro friendly, right? So usually that was like Greek yogurt with some almonds in it and some berries or whatever. Just try to get a lot of volume, a lot of protein. And then I would just bring 3 protein bars and 2 apples with me. And like we're going whatever 4 or 5 hours later, just slam all of that. And then I'm good until the end of the day. And I'll go back to the Airbnb and eat some plain chicken and a sweet potato while everyone else has takeout. That's fine. But yeah, I mean that honestly served me really well. Just keeping it really simple. That was my main goal, is as simple as I can do this. We went out to a couple of restaurants and I just either didn't get anything or I would just get a salad or something. That lame dude getting a salad at the pizza place. But like we said, you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes, and it's all good. And I think the biggest thing, even beyond the actual food stuff, is framing my mindset in the sense of what I'm doing here is hanging out with friends. When we go to this restaurant, we're at the restaurant, but I'm there to hang out with everybody. I'm not there to eat per se. If we eat something, cool, but that's not the main point of the experience. And that helped me quite a bit, was trying to just shift that a little bit. Then I didn't feel left out because I was doing the thing I came there to do. So that was very helpful. The guys made fun of me a little bit for my plain chicken, but what are you
Of
gonna
course. Yeah, no, I like that, man. I like the kind of reframing. Hey, I'm hanging out with my friends. That's the most important, right? Because I do think that people struggle with that. They end up thinking the food's like the main thing, but it's like, hey, what do I want out of this? I get to hang out with my friends, and reframing that. But yeah, keeping it simple, man, and just having that plan. It sounds like basically what you did there with that. And yes, there were some sacrifices, but like you said, this is what you wanted to do, and you thought it through and came up with the best plan there with that. So I think that's awesome, man. That sounds. I know anytime I've had to travel, like when I don't know if I ended up traveling I may have done something, and I think I had one or two during that time, and man, that was always super challenging to do. So it's not easy,
It's
but
tricky. Yeah, it's tricky.
so
The high step counts help me a lot because like I
yeah.
said, my step counts are not super high usually. So a lot of those days I'm getting 16, 18,000 steps. We're just walking around. One of them, me and my girlfriend were out hiking like every day. That helped a lot. So leaning into those activity-based things rather than just, sitting around doing whatever was nice.
Almost doubling, almost yeah, over doubling your normal
Yeah,
step total there. That will do it. Cool, man. Yeah, that's awesome. So 19 weeks away, well on your way there with that. Still got a little bit of time. I'm sure it still seems like it's a little bit ways away, but
it
yeah, cool.
does.
Looking forward to see how you do, man. With that, real quick, one thing I wanted to talk to you about too. Your so PhD candidate. What's the main focus there with that? And yeah,
Yeah. So I mentioned the case study already. That's separate from my dissertation, but that's still going to end up being one of the main projects that we do. So that's exciting. I love that I get to do that for my PhD, right? It's
yeah.
cool. But the main dissertation is there's two main pieces of it. Piece number one is looking at changing set numbers versus keeping them the same, basically. So what I'm doing is having people come in. It's a within subjects design. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, what that does, people come in a subject, one arm does a certain protocol, the other arm will do a different protocol. And that's really helpful. It effectively doubles your sample size and makes the ability to make strong inferences from the statistics much better. So that's very helpful. So what we're doing, one arm is always doing the same number of sets of bicep curls, and the other arm, it is allowed to do more sets or less sets or the same number, whatever, depending on their performance. So we have a certain performance cutoff that they come in, they're doing every set to failure. Once their performance drops off by a certain amount, that's when they stop. So if they come in, they're under recovered, they feel really tired and sluggish, whatever, their performance tanks sooner, they're going to stop their session sooner and do less sets. Alternatively, if they feel amazing and really energetic, they might do more sets, but the other arm's always doing the same no matter what. So we'll be able to, by the end, look at is it helpful to auto-regulate how many sets you're doing based on your performance and recovery. It still doesn't feel real that I'm doing that for my PhD because that was before I even started college, period, right? Undergrad or anything. I was listening to Mike Israetel and Steve Hall talk about it on their podcast, this sets thing, and I'm like, that's cool. There's no research on it though. It'd be cool if there was research. And now I get to start doing the research. So it's so cool, man. But so I'm really excited about that. That's the main piece. And then the secondary piece is every single set that people do, we're getting a rating of their pump. And then at the end of every session, we're getting like subjective session difficulty. We're getting their soreness when they come in to train and also the day after they train. We're getting their sleep quality, stress levels, whatever. And then so I'm going to be able to look at the relationship between those things and the hypertrophy that they get in the long term. So the pump is the one that I'm probably the most, pump and soreness are the ones I'm the most interested in. But my goal with that piece is to be able to see, it's not going to tell us whether something causes hypertrophy, right? But just, is there some relationship between these things or not? And therefore, what things should we maybe pay closer attention to when we're working with clients or just training ourselves or whatever? Very excited about those. My goal with the project was to keep it as practical as I could so that it's actually actionable for people in the gym, right? So we have probably another almost a year, unfortunately, until all the data collection's done with that. So it'll be a minute before I can share any findings from that, but it'll be cool. It'll be cool.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Two really cool studies on the pump. Where do we sit with that currently, right? Like, where's things at there at the moment from like a pump perspective and hypertrophy?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is it's tough because there's not much research, right? There's not much at all. What we have is mostly indirect also. So it's tricky. I think there's a couple questions there, right? Like one is, does the pump cause hypertrophy? And I think with that, it's maybe, but we don't have strong reason to say yes. So I think the default is still that mechanical tension is by far the biggest driver. We should focus on that. But it's not completely off the table, that it's at least some supplemental stimulus for hypertrophy. But then the other big question is it useful to help adjust the training, which is part of why I'm doing this for my project. And with that, I lean towards it's something. It's better than nothing. I totally understand why other people might say don't pay attention to it. I totally get it. Right, as of right now, we have one study, right? There's one from Hirono that they had the relationship between hypertrophy and just at a single time point, the acute muscle swelling measured by an ultrasound, right? Which is analogous to the pump. So there is a positive relationship between that acute pump and that one session is the first session of the training study and the long-term hypertrophy that they got. But two things. One, it's one study. So Two, it was measured swelling with an ultrasound. It's not necessarily the same as your perception of a pump, which, by the way, I'm doing an acute study on that specifically. Is our perception of pump related strongly to measured muscle swelling? So hopefully that can help to bridge that gap a little bit. But so we have that study that's okay, there's a relationship, but not quite the same, indirect. There's a conference abstract that showed essentially the same things, but we don't have the full text yet. That's really all we have. That's the most direct that we have. There's a handful of studies that looked at, for example, what causes more swelling in the gastrocnemius versus the soleus between a seated and a standing calf raise. And then a separate study that looks at which of those muscles grows the most in a standing or seated calf raise. So even there, and there's some little clues maybe, but when you start to try to compare different samples, like they're not the same subjects, right? It's completely different studies. So when we start to try to compare those things, it gets even more dicey. Even those, if you look across, I have an Instagram post about this that kind of broke those down. It's probably like a couple months ago, maybe, if anyone's interested and wants to look at those specific comparisons. But if I remember correctly, there was a calf study with the gastroc and the soleus. There was a pec study with the upper and lower pecs. And I believe the question I posed in that part of the post was like, if you choose your exercise based on what gives you the best pump, does that also lead to more growth? So is that therefore a good choice, basically? And of those four, I think one was a yes, two were like neutral. So it wasn't worse, but it also wasn't particularly better. And one was like unclear, but maybe worse, if I remember correctly. So even that, I don't know. How I think about it now is it's probably at worst a neutral thing as long as everything else is equal, right? Let's say we're trying to use our pump to adjust our training in whatever way. You got to keep everything else equal because you could just change your rep range and you're going to get a way different pump, right? So as long as your rep range is similar, your set number is similar, your proximity to failure is similar, the exercise is the same, then I start to think about, okay, you didn't get any pump at all in an exercise that I would expect, like a leg extension. Maybe we try to do another set or something, right? Or maybe you got a great pump and then you kept going and the pump went away and you still kept going. To me, I have no data on this to be clear, but based on my experience, I'm like, that's probably too much in one session, right? Like that just, I don't know. So then maybe we pull back. So that's how I have thought to use it a little bit. Even that is dicey. Not every muscle seems to get a good pump. Not every exercise gives you a good pump. So it is the most gray of all gray areas. I tend to use it a little bit like that as one of several indicators. I think it makes some sense and it's probably at worst a neutral thing. But yeah, I totally get why some people are like, yeah, just leave it. Maybe in the future we find out more stuff from future research and we can like, oh, it's useful for this specifically or whatever. But yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, it sounds like, again, don't necessarily chase it, but again, it's if you have, to me, I feel like if you have a pump, that's probably more of a positive than anything. But like you said, it can just be based on the rep range and things like that. So it doesn't tell you everything.
Yeah.
But if you're never getting one, like you said there, it's like, hey, maybe we can adjust things a little bit to ensure that you may, and that could be something. But again, we don't have any research for sure. Like you said, it's in the middle there, basically one positive, two neutral, and then one potentially negative. So it's like
It's
literally
tough.
right in the middle. So I'm assuming too, so what would be, so like obviously rep ranges, like I'm assuming higher rep ranges are probably going to lend themselves to potentially getting a better pump. Like you said, certain muscle groups as well too. What about, and this may be something that you're going to look at, like nutrition status, hydration status, like sleep status, are those all things that you think will also benefit or potentially alter that as well too?
Probably. Yeah, the more hydrated you are, you have more sodium, more carbs, more et cetera in your system. It's just more stuff that can get in the muscle. So that's the other piece of all these studies. They're not controlling for that. I'm not controlling for that in my study, which is, I think, a strength and a weakness. It gives us less ability to answer that specific question, but it does make it more generalizable, more ecologically valid, so to speak, that just the everyday person can use this in their life or whatever. I don't know. Ideally, what I would love to see, dude, is just somebody somehow get the funding, which is probably impossible, to have a very tightly controlled study where they are controlling the hydration and the nutrition of these subjects, and it's a very tightly controlled training protocol, and then they can really get a much better idea of what's going on there. But it's tough. For some reason, the government doesn't seem to care too much about pumps when there's other problems like obesity and whatever. So
I'm really not sure
I
why.
don't know.
But I know for me, man, this has obviously changed now, but back in the day, it was really about that was the best feeling in the world. Like when you first get into training, dude, like just going for that pump, you're like, man, why do I look so much like bigger when I'm at the gym? And then you almost get addicted to that and you chase it. And I think that's probably where we would shy people away from is like just
Yeah,
chasing that. Because again, if you do that, like you said, you can just do certain things. And again, you may not be providing overload. Again, you could just be choosing certain exercises that may, I think the big thing is you can go down that rabbit hole of over chasing it, but at the same time, like if you're never getting it, that's also potentially something you would look into. This is somebody recently brought this up to me, just looking at soreness like the same way, right? We're not necessarily trying to chase soreness, but if you never get it, it's like, could we potentially alter some things? And I thought that was super helpful to think about there with that.
100%. Totally. The soreness thing is interesting too, because what's interesting to me about soreness is the more that we're learning about hypertrophy and how it's like closer to failure, it seems to, on average, in general, a little bit more. Some of these high volume studies, like they're going a little bit more, that those things typically make you more sore also, right? Some of the long muscle length stuff, right? Can't talk more muscle damage, more soreness, whatever. So then it's even makes me even more confident in still being conservative with it, but more confident in the sense of you're never getting sore at all. We can probably handle a little bit more if your goal is just hyper. If you have strength goals also, cool, right? We need to be a little bit more careful, but if you're just trying to grow, I don't know. That seems like a really reasonable thing to go by for me, but maybe we're wrong, right? We could totally be proven wrong at some point. And like you said, it's just one of those, you shouldn't chase soreness at all. It's just if soreness is a byproduct of the appropriate training program that you're doing, right? And whatever. Looking at it like that, I think is much more useful. And hopefully that's obvious, but unfortunately it is not to everybody. So
Yeah, again, it's just if you use it as a proxy, it can help you make some decisions that will help you there. I think that's the best thing we can do with it right now. And obviously you're doing more research on it and more will be coming out hopefully on it. Yeah, off of that, and this doesn't really have to do with research, and there would be probably no way to research this, but from your experience, what do you find like muscle groups tend to get the most pump from training?
I would say, man, biceps seem like a pretty easy one for most people, but not everybody. Even so, like my dissertation study, I'm not joking at all, right? We have two different people who quite often were doing like 12 to 16 sets in one session, right? Two times a week. So that's whatever that is, math, 30 sets a week or whatever. And their pumps, they're rating them like as a slight pump, even at the end. This is crazy. So not everybody, it's different person to person, right? But biceps for the most part seem to be a pretty safe bet for most people. Chest seems like a pretty good one for most people. Quads can be if they know how to actually train hard, which sounds bad. I promise I'm not attacking people, but most of us underestimate how hard we can push with quad training, right? Myself included. But if you actually get close to failure, that's a pretty good one. I would say glutes for the most part. People can get a good pump there. Once you really like you've been training for a while and you get a good feel, a back pump is awesome.
Yeah.
But a lot of people struggle with that. It took me years probably to figure it out when I was trying to just starting. And I don't know, hamstrings can be good, but like hip hinges don't really do it. So if you don't really do any leg curls, you're probably not going to really get pumps there.
I personally just find with like hamstrings, it's just like the burn that those are the ones that just freaking
Yeah,
you get a gnarly kind of burn there with those, not
calves are
necessarily a
the
pump.
worst.
Yeah.
Calves are the worst, dude. Yeah.
Calves, you can get, I feel like you can get a pretty decent pump there as well too. But yeah, back, like you said, that's where how we talked about earlier with the posing, that really helped me start
Yeah.
to engage my lats and feel what that felt like there. So just come full circle on that one.
There we go. Yeah, agreed.
Cool, man. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Good kind of information there on the pump. I think it's super interesting there with that. And yeah, so as far as your other study goes, what's your, I don't know if you can share or not. What's your hypothesis? What do you think will happen? Do you have an idea of what you think based on your experience or?
So my official hypothesis when I did my proposal for the project, right, was auto-regulating volume would lead to better growth than just always doing the same amount no matter what. Now that we've had some additional research come out, and now that I've gone through a whole group of subjects, I think I would still say that as my hypothesis, but I feel a little bit less confident in it now. But we'll see. It's tough because we've had 10 subjects go through so far. And just looking at the numbers of how many sets they did and looking at the bicep scans, the ultrasound scans, you can think you see some trends, but you got to actually get in there and analyze the scans and then run all the stats and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to really not look at it is my main goal because I don't want to sway myself and bias it. But that's probably what I would say there for the pump and soreness and all that, all of the relationship with hypertrophy stuff. The official hypothesis was not one because there's no prior research, so this is exploratory. What I would guess is this is purely based on coaching and training experience, is that the pump and the like subjective session difficulty might trend with it pretty well, or at least reasonably well. Soreness seems really hit and miss. Some people just seem like they don't get sore very much at all. Some people get crippled from 2 sets, and it's crazy. What I've also noticed is that getting people's soreness ratings when they come in to train, and then also the day after they train, trying to get some of that, like some of the DOMS stuff captured in there. Some people don't get sore until 2 or 3 days after they train. So I'm going to be missing some stuff regardless. The soreness is tricky because the timelines for people are just different. And the other thing, it's like one of the things about research you don't realize until you try to do it is like they're training twice a week, but it's not always Monday, Friday, even for the same subject, right? Sometimes it's Monday, Friday, sometimes it's Monday, Thursday, sometimes it's Tuesday, Saturday, sometimes it's Tuesday, Thursday. Like it just depends on their schedule. We got to work around their life. So the soreness gets messy because less time between sessions or more time between sessions, it can just try to change it. So my guess is the data with that is going to show nothing just because it gets a little bit messy. But in a practical perspective, right, if you're coaching somebody and they train pretty consistent days or it's a little bit more consistent that way, I would guess that's probably related in some way. Probably weekly would be my guess, but there's maybe something there. So we'll see. I can't wait to look at what the results are, watch all of it being conclusive. Hopefully we find something interesting.
Yeah, man. I always tell any researcher that comes on here, I really appreciate what you guys do because it's challenging. It's almost it's like coaching, right? Where it's like you think it's just cut and dry, like these subjects are perfect subjects and they do everything you say and everything, but it's just like having a bunch of clients that you need data on. So it's like, man, it can be frustrating and whatnot. So always appreciate what you guys do there with that.
Thanks, dude.
So
Yeah.
cool, man. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to bring you on to was RIR. I know you have a lot of stuff on RIR. So I was wondering if we can maybe just chat about what it is. And then I want to talk about what the research says on it, how effective it is, things like that. And yeah, so we'll go there. I'll hand it over to
Yeah.
you. RIR stuff.
So I guess baseline, just so we're all on the same page, right? RIR, reps in reserve, that is trying to measure how close to failure you are, right? And that kind of started it's so interesting to look back at the old research because it's just like, why did you think that would work? But they have to start with what they had. So it started with the Borg RPE scale that was 6 to 20. It was supposed to track with your heart rate roughly for like cardio exercise. And people were like, let's use this to measure how hard resistance training is. A set of leg press and a set of bicep curls feel very different cardiovascularly, and your heart rate's way different. And so it just got really messy. And then they tried to make that into a 0 to 10 scale, but it was still weird. It's just like total difficulty rating kind of deal. So then, this is actually funny enough, why I'm in this lab was this study, this 2016 study that Dr. Zordos led using Mike Tucher's RIR-based RPE scale that he did. So Mike Tucher, very well-known, very successful powerlifter and powerlifting coach with the reactive training systems, and he was doing this on his own a lot, right? Where he would say, okay, an RPE 10 is a maximum effort set. RPE 9 is 1 rep left in the tank, RPE 8, 2 reps left in the tank, so on and so forth. And then Dr. Zordos in the lab here just tested that out, right? Just to see, is this a valid thing? And he found that it was. And now that's used all the time. And people have just changed it to some other studies like by Hackett et al. From Australia, I believe, used the estimated reps to failure scale, which is just RIR, right? They just called it something different. But now that's become what most people use, at least for like non-squat bench deadlift stuff for the most part, is just reps in reserve. And so, yeah, so there's been a bunch of research. I've been involved with a few papers on, okay, we have this scale that seems to be relatively valid and accurate, but can people actually accurately gauge what their RIR is? And it's an important question, right? Because if people are way off, then it's not very useful. So my undergrad thesis, actually, the last year of my undergrad, I just walked up to the guy who ran the lab there and I was like, can I do my own study? Here's my idea. And luckily he said yes. I got to do that. My undergrad was like how accurately can people gauge their RIR in these exercises that have never been done using some untrained people and some females that was very underrepresented in the research at the time. And so that was cool. So I did that one. And then my master's thesis looked at this too on can people improve their accuracy over time with more practice? And there's been, several other studies on those same topics. And it's basically in a meta-analysis now at this point too, that for the most part, people are very accurate, right? Even people with very little training experience. My study that used completely untrained people all the way up to, I'm trying to remember the most experienced person we had, probably like 7 or 8 years or something. It's like very little difference between how accurate they are. And that's usually what that is the first set that somebody does, if they're untrained, they're way off, right? Their first set, they're just guessing. But then once they get to set three, they know what they're doing, right? Like they calibrate pretty quick. I think that's helpful for a lot of people to know is even if you've never lifted before, you're going to be way off at first, but you're going to get the hang of it very quickly. And it can still be a good tool, and on average, people are off by 1 rep or something like that, which I think is functionally as good as you need to be. Who cares if it was actually two or three? Like it's whatever. So as long as you're reasonably close to failure, and as long as your sets have rep ranges of, I think 12 is where the break point is in the meta-analysis. So 12 reps or less, you're golden for the most part. You're going to be able to rate it pretty accurately. Higher rep sets, especially lower body lifts where the discomfort is just so much, it burns really bad. It gets harder and harder to judge, but still, if you do multiple sets, you get more and more accurate each set. So people can, on average, rate it pretty accurately. So it seems to be pretty useful. And then now the question just becomes, okay, we have this scale that's valid. People can rate pretty accurately. Does this pan out to leading to better progress compared to using percentage-based training or whatever? And there's not a ton of studies on that, really. There is a couple, and so far we've seen that, yes, it does seem to be helpful. There's one from, it was a little bit more strength focused, but Graham and Cleather were the authors. I hope I'm pronouncing that, probably not. But they found that the group that could auto-regulate based on their RIR had better gains by the end compared to the percentage-based group because they could keep pace with their adaptations, right? As they got stronger, as they got more used to the training, they could increase the loads and keep it hard enough to make good progress rather than just being stuck basically with these percentages. So yeah, it seems to work really well. And then we had, was that last year? I think the preprint of the meta regression from, we say from our lab, but 99% from Zach Robinson, who did a fantastic job with that analysis on, is there a dose response between how close to failure we get, thus less RIR, and the hypertrophy and the strength. And on average, it seems like closer to failure is better hypertrophy, with the most hypertrophy at failure. And then for strength, it's a little bit different. It's if you're getting closer to failure because the load is increasing, that's good because load is important for strength. If you're getting closer to failure because you're doing more reps at the same load, not as good. Basically the same response regardless of RIR. So probably better to stay a bit further from failure in that case. So for strength, I think the takeaway is do a top set where the load's increasing, and then your back off stuff can be a bit further from failure. Hypertrophy, just like we said earlier, it's like more seems to be better, just more dose. So then it just becomes a balancing game of we want to be closer to failure, but we got to make sure we can still recover on time. We want to do more volume for the most part, but we got to make sure we can recover on time. So just balancing those two levers to try to find what is that sweet spot that lets somebody pack in some really good volume, but still be able to recover on time and not just face plant by the end of the week.
Yeah, finding that optimal kind of dosage there of, like you said, RIR, volume, intensity, and kind of getting as much of that in as you can. I feel like the kind of secret sauce there of hypertrophy training, but it's figuring that out. That's the hard part, right?
It's tough. I think that's going to be a wave of research here within the next several years. We have a study that we did last year that we're in the process, we're in like the analysis process now. That again, one study, it's not going to answer anything, but it's a start at least of which of those should we prioritize, right? If you're doing really high volume and you try to go to failure instead of being at 2 or 3 reps in reserve, you can't do both. You can't max out both at the same time. So should I prioritize volume and stay a little bit further from failure, or should I prioritize going to failure and just do the less volume because I can't recover from everything? So that's a study that we did that hopefully we can get that out there without or before too crazy long, because I think I have no idea what the findings are, by the way, but hopefully it's interesting and is at least a starting point for helping to decide how to play that balancing game. But it's going to be a while before the research has a definitive answer. If it ever does, it might just always be like, yeah, both are great. So that might be one of those things that's always kind of part of the art of coaching, is finding that balance.
Yep. Yeah. And then too on that, again, people might hear, oh, okay, I need to go closer to failure, so I should just do zero RIR all the time. But again, the issue becomes recovery. And from my understanding and the research currently, you may have hit on this, but obviously the closer you get to failure too, the higher the kind of fatigue cost. And as you get to zero, that fatigue cost is going to be a little bit higher. I think that's where the research is at on that.
For sure. For sure. And I think what's helpful is to, and Josh Pellin said this a while ago that I was just like, damn, that's a great way to say that. So I'm going to parrot it now, is especially these meta-analyses that are looking at dose responses, is like, rather than getting too in the weeds, just think about what's the direction of the relationship.
Yeah.
So like for this, on average, closer to failure seems to be more growth. So, but if you look at the plot, and the preprint's up there for free, anybody can read it, they can see the graphs and stuff. If you just look at the graph, there's positive effect sizes, meaning hypertrophy is happening, even at 10 or 12 reps away from failure, right? It's just not maximal. So I'm just like, man, we can do work 4, 5, 6 reps away. Some work that's 2, 3, 4 reps away. You know what I mean? We can hit that whole spectrum, especially if it's things that are heavier weights, right? You're doing sets of 8 or something. Like, you don't have to go to failure every time. You can leave a few reps in the tank, whatever. And then if you want to finish with a set of 20 drop set, whatever crazy stuff that's to failure and forced reps at the end, awesome. Go to town, have fun. But I think to me, it makes sense to not put all our eggs in one basket, letting ourselves work through that whole spectrum. And then as we continue to learn more, we'll be able to be more fine-tuned. Because that's the other thing too, that analysis is not perfect either, right? Like there's limitations in the studies that were used for the analysis is great, but the studies that were used for it have some limitations. Like most of them did not quantify RIR, right? Most of them used velocity or a certain rep target at a certain percentage of 1RM. And so we had to estimate their RIR. Somebody could justifiably disagree with how we estimated certain things, and that might throw off the analysis a little bit. So that, and Zach will tell you this too, the mastermind behind that project was like, that should not be taken as gospel by any means. It's just, we have this general directionality that seems like it's pretty reliable, and leave it there. You know what I mean? Not get too deep into it.
Well, if anything, it's a good thing that now that we have that, now you researchers can go off of that study, right? And that it leads to more and more findings there. And that's the point. But yeah, no, it's great. And when it first came out, I did take it as, oh, hey, failure, that's what you need to do. And then obviously as Zach talked on it more, I learned more. It was like, hey, this is the direction it's going. So again, generally, like when we're talking about hypertrophy prescription, it's on average, you probably want to get closer to failure than being further away. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go to zero RIR every single time. You just want to get closer to it there with that. So yeah, no, that was an awesome one. As far as like the RIR talk goes too, so you mentioned sometimes when it's more or less accurate, and you said on average people are usually about 1 off. And I'm assuming they're off, like they think they're at 1 RIR, but they're like at 2 RIR, I'm assuming, right? Like they think they're a little bit further away. And then things like higher rep ranges, lower body stuff, we tend to be a little bit further off. So if you're someone who maybe is like not growing your legs as you would like, it's okay, you might actually need you think you're at like say 1 RIR, but really you're at like 2 to 3. So you may, need to push a little bit closer to there.
It's crazy. I don't know if you've had an embarrassing experience like I have this, where I was doing leg extensions one day. This was years ago. And I was like, I'm pretty good at rating RIR, right? Like I feel very confident about it. So I'm doing sets to 12 at 2 reps in reserve. Cool. This last set, let me just go to failure just to make sure. And rather than 12, I got 30 reps or something. Just ridiculous. And I think that's really common, that especially leg extensions, leg press, I wouldn't do it on a normal squat because it's so technique dependent, right? But Smith machine squat, hack squat, you can push so much harder than you think. It's crazy. And I'll tell that to clients a lot of times too. If I see things where they rated the RIR as 2 and I see a video and I'm just like, bro, come on. We know that wasn't. So then it's almost okay on our lower body stuff. I'm going to tell you to go to 0 RIR because then you're going to stop it too. Or we're just going to have those discussions of like, overshoot it on purpose a little bit. I think it's so funny because people complain so much about their legs not growing, right? Myself, like this was me, 100%. And I think a lot of it is we're just not training as hard as we think we are because it sucks, dude. Like now I feel like I've figured it out pretty well now. And every leg day I dread it a little bit. Like it's fun, but I'm still like, man, again, can I just go do some chest or something? Like it's hard, it's a little bit, it's daunting. And I think that's how it's supposed to be, right? That's now I get it why all these big bodybuilders were just like, yeah, leg day is the worst and whatever. And me a few years ago was like, leg day is the best. What are you talking about? And now I get it because
Yep.
you can really push hard. Yeah.
Do you feel like that's maybe one, like you talked about, this can be a great tool for people? Again, it might take you just a tiny bit. Like you said, even the first set you do of something, even if you're a trained person, you might be a little bit further off. But as you get further into it, do you feel like this is one of the maybe bigger limitations of it is it can be somewhat subjective? And I'm sure this is a common critique, and you guys went over this in the research. But I guess what I'm trying to get at here is people thinking that like 2 RIR is like easy training, right? Where it's really not easy training still at 2 RIR. But would you say that's
Yeah.
probably like the biggest kind of like issue with RIR training for people most of the time?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. And some people really just aren't very accurate, right? That does happen. Even though the research says on average people are off by one, like that's an average, right? So some people are off by, some people are perfect, some people are off by four or whatever. So it is a skill, I think, and I think it's very helpful. Even if you don't want to train to failure all the time for whatever reason, that's totally fine. Every once in a while, I think it's very helpful just to help dial that in a little bit. And even if it's as simple as the last set of an exercise, the last week of your training block or something, because you're going to deload the next week, fatigue's not a big issue, whatever. Some people can do those like an audit set like that, right? Can do it more frequently, and it's not a. I really think that there's a training effect there too, to where the fatigue is not as big of a deal as what we used to think. Get used to it, right? It's not as bad. And I think it's very helpful though for helping to calibrate those things, especially the leg press and the hack squat and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just like you said, audit it and take it to failure and kind of see so you can judge where it's at. Do you have any like good proxies of, hey, you're getting to this 2-ish RAR, that sweet spot that we say like, all right, now you're really going to see some good gains here. Again, you could take it further, but you're in that spot to where it's like, all right, you're at least in the safe zone there to do a good job. Do you have any proxies that you'll typically look for or anything like that there?
Yeah, I think so. I think most exercises, especially upper body, it's like when you see the speed of the rep is very getting really slow compared to the early reps, we're getting pretty close, right? Like you can usually grind out based on my experience watching people in the gym and watching people in the lab, which has been helpful because in the lab, like we're yelling at them, making them go to failure, right? That so seeing just how people can grind on a variety of exercises has been helpful. And it seems if you're really trying to go there, a lot of upper body stuff, you can usually get most people can get between, I say on average, two or three like slow, grindy reps. Even if your range of motion starts to be not quite as good at the very end, depending on the exercise, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If it's a lat pull down, then you're good. But that's usually what I've seen. Some people they get one slow one and they're done, right? That probably depends also on like the resistance curve of the exercise and whatever. But some 1 to 3, we'll call it, right? For most exercises, you can get some slow, grindy reps like that. So once you start to see a rep is slow and grindy, okay, I'm getting close. If it's some kind of quad-based pressing movement, this is going to sound like I'm exaggerating. The rule of thumb I have for like for myself now especially is once it starts getting slow and grindy, the set starts now, which is exaggerating. The other reps still count, they're still productive, but I have 8 more reps. And I think I'm not the only one who's like that. And I've seen some crazy stuff in the lab, dude. I've seen people, I thought watching them, they had 1 or 2 left and they got 10 more.
Yeah.
And it's wild. Those kind of exercises, it's tough to have that proxy, to be honest. I think that it's almost like you get to that rep, not just where it's really slow, but it's like somebody spot me. Like you get that quick little flash of anxiety. It's okay, now we're at 2 reps away or whatever. Again, not everybody, and that's I could be biased too, just from seeing in the lab people going to legit failure all the time or being around people who are bodybuilding and whatnot. But yeah, that's probably what I would say for right now.
Yeah, it sounds like, again, obviously form videos, looking at technique, like that's going to be super helpful. But also, again, it just comes back to just testing it and just seeing it. At the end of the day, that's going to be your best friend because you can really push it. Like you said, you got some people that things slow down. They're pretty much at the end there. But then some people slow down. And like you said, holy crap, you just got 10 more reps. I would have thought you were done 10 reps ago. So it is
Yep.
very individual. Again, and this is maybe where now we can start to use, hopefully we find out, hey, if we can use the pump or something like that too, to also factor into the decision making there. Is there anything that like people get wrong with RIR RIR or any like misapplications of it or anything that you see on social media where it's like people kind of misrepresent it the wrong way or anything like that?
It's probably, I think we've already touched on it. You've brought them both up, I think, where on the one side, it's people saying, okay, well, you have to train to failure on everything. Like that's the answer. And then on the other side, it's the people saying leaving a couple reps in the tank is super easy. And I'm just, to me, statements like that are so, like, how can you make that statement with such confidence? Like, I don't understand. But yeah, those are probably the things that I see the most. But even those, I don't see it a ton. I think that, dude, Instagram is wild and YouTube. Like, it's wild how much more accessible the information is now and how much more information there is. Like when I started doing 10 years ago, when I started training, there wasn't anything, dude. It was just, there were some people that said train as hard as you can. Other people said leave some reps in the tank, and that was it. And even that was hard to find. Most of the stuff on social media was just, I don't even know if they were called influencers back then, but that's basically what it was.
Yep.
And now it's you say anything and people are like, what's the PMID? I'm like, it's just crazy how the turntables. It's office reference. I hope somebody caught that and I don't just sound dumb on
I
the
thought
podcast.
I thought that's where you're going with that.
Okay, cool. But yeah, it's so interesting and I think that's helped to not see those things nearly as often. You still see it every once in a while, but usually it's people who are set in their ways from they've just been doing this for a long time, right? And they've seen certain results with their clients or themselves doing it a certain way. And, you know, uh, who am I to argue with them that much? If they're getting results and their clients are happy and everything, no one's getting hurt, everything's fine, then fair play.
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. I agree, right? If it's worked for certain people, again, I think we know that there's definitely some individualization that goes into all this stuff too, and finding what works for you is part of it, right? I think you actually had a post on this recently. We use research as the guide, and obviously within that, you can always make adjustments, but it gives you that kind of goalpost to start with, and then you can go from there if you need to, and gives you the averages and everything. Cool, man. Is there anything we missed on RIR or anything like any other common questions around RIR or anything like that? And either from clients, people on Instagram, anything like that?
Not that I can think of, man. I think that was
Yep.
everything. I'm probably forgetting something very obvious.
It sounds like again, and I know you made a post on this was a while now, but November 25th, 2023, basically evidence continues to mount for the utility of RIR. So we know it's definitely a tool that we can use. And again, most people are going to be pretty accurate, but at the end of the day, the best way to find out is to take it to failure every once in a while and just test and see where you're at and know yourself too. And if you're a coach, probably know your client as well too. Okay, this person's probably sandbagging a little bit here.
Yeah.
Let's maybe, like you said in that example where you're like, hey, I'm going to put 0 RIR for this person knowing they're going to get to 2 RER essentially
Right.
there versus giving them actually 2 RER and now they're 5, 6 reps or whatever it may be there with that. Cool,
Yep.
man. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Again, I use RER and I think it's a great tool. And yeah, I'm glad that we're getting more research on it because it's a nice way to really make sure people are training hard enough, but not too far away from failure either. Cool, man. Great stuff. Is there anything like coming out on your end anytime soon? I know you hinted at a couple research papers that you're going to be involved in. Is there anything else that you're involved in coming out soon or anything like that?
I'll tease one more research thing that I feel bad teasing it because we've been teasing it for a while and I promise we're working really hard on it. We're trying to get it out there, but we are as a lab, we're redoing, I shouldn't say redoing, updating the meta-analysis on dose responsive volume and hypertrophy because the one that we have that everyone cited a million times is the 2017 one from Schoenfeld. That was awesome, but 7 years ago. And there's just been more studies, particularly more high volume studies that we can include into the model and see what's going on there, get an updated picture of that. Very excited about that. And then a separate project that is closely related, but it is a distinct paper, will be the dose response of volume within a session and the hypertrophy. So trying to look at both the total weekly stuff and then what's going on in individual sessions. Very excited for those that'll look at both strength and hypertrophy outcomes. That we have the results and I can't wait to talk about it, but I can't talk about it yet, but I'm very excited. And those will be really exciting to get out into the world. Our goal is to have them pre-printed sometime this summer. That's the goal. We'll see. So don't hold me to that, but that is the goal. We've been promising them for a while, so we'd love to get them out there and for people to be able to read them and get some discussion and all that going. But I think they'll be really good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I'm really looking forward to those and definitely probably something that will take social media by storm. And so you'll have to burn out some fires there with that. So cool,
Yep.
man. Really appreciate your time. A ton of great information here. Before I let you go, anywhere where you want to lead the audience to or anything like that to find out more about you?
I guess Instagram, I guess, is where I put everything. It's just Jake.datadriven strength. I guess I'll end by just thanking you, dude. I appreciate this so much. I love doing this kind of thing. It's so fun and it's very enjoyable talking to you. And this was great. So thank you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I love doing these too. It's always cool to get others' thoughts on everything. And again, social media is just some of it, but it's really nice to be able to actually talk face to face on that about
Yeah.
computer to computer essentially
Yeah,
with it. But
for
Jake,
sure.
all right, man, appreciate your time, dude. We'll have to have you on again here soon.
I would love to. Yeah, thank you.